let's get into what's happening now with Syria. And, we've spoken quite a bit about Syria this past week on this program. Um, we have not spoken as much about the sort of the political aspects of it, and so we're gonna talk a bit about that with you. Um, Piece out today in Politico, which jibes with just about everybody else's reporting and whip counts, and everybody I have spoken to who hang out in Washington, and that as of now, it appears that the authorization for use of military force will pass in the Senate probably, but it doesn't look like it has much of a chance in the House.
Yeah, which not, and frankly, I guess. Well, yeah, I guess they can put together 65, 70 votes because they need 60 in the Senate, right? I mean,
Right.
I think Rand is going to filibuster it, isn't he? So,
Indeed.
um,
Well, I don't
so
know if he said he's going to filibuster it at this point. I think he said something to the effect of "We're going to let this die in the House," but nevertheless, they need 60. There's a belief that they need 60.
right, and so I guess in the end, yeah. I mean, look, McCain can bring along Lindsay and I'm sure Ayotte and people like that, and the question is how many progressives will peel off from the Democratic side, which I find interesting. But yeah, it does. It looks like I think you're right. I think they probably get either close or above 60 in the Senate, but the House, I don't know how they do that because there are enough Democrats who've already said they don't want to do it in the House, and you have to figure most of the Republicans are not going to go along with it because it's not a war that George W. Bush is starting.
Yeah.
So, and again, I'm being facetious in the I oppose this action, so I suppose I should just be glad they're opposing it. But I do kind of find it a little bit funny. Some of the nutbag Republicans who are saying things they're saying right now, who were just all gung ho about Iraq. I do find that kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is it shows the sort of the power that Randyism has in the Republican Party today. But so I want to just go over what Politico reports because we could have reported this from ABC or from other whip counts, but. Republicans are looking at maybe 50 to 60 Republicans who will vote. Remember, you need to get to 217. Right now, the whip counts I've seen is they have 24 yeses or lean yeses and 217 noes or leans no. Now, there's a sense that this is going to change next week when President Obama gets back and they're going to have he's going to meet with, I guess, either congressional leaders or even more parts of Congress to show the intelligence. But nevertheless, at this point, you have Boehner and Cantor, who have not been whipping too hard, apparently, but they are definitely for it. Pelosi also and Steny Hoyer are for it. They can only get around 115 to 130 yes votes on the Democratic side. They are not whipping very hard on this at this point. Here's one.
I mean, well, let me let you finish, then we'll get into the
No, go.
What powers are left among both Democratic and Republican leadership?
In terms of, no, go ahead. You make your point.
I mean, I don't think anybody, most of the Republicans anymore care what John Boehner thinks in the House. He can whip everybody all he wants. I think he's pretty close to soon being a deposed speaker. I've even heard read places he's not going to run again for speaker because I think he knows his days are coming to an end. So I don't know that they're going to be able to change any minds on that side because look, John Boehner wants you to do it. And I wonder on the Democratic side, I don't know how widespread it is, but I have a few friends up on the Hill who I've talked to, and the thing is that. Who are staffers, I'll be clear, for progressives. And I think a lot of them are just kind of sick and tired of carrying Obama's water.
Interesting.
I mean, what's at this point, kind of what's your motivation on this?
Right. Where's the win?
Do it for your president who is basically setting you up to get crushed in 2014 by Republicans who will now be able to run to your left as isolationists, because 80% of the country opposes this thing. particularly if anything goes wrong, which nothing ever does. With these things, just ask, I don't know, Jimmy Carter or George W. Bush. Whether it's a limited invasion or a limited strike or a major one, and whether it's a justified one or not, war at its best is chaos. Things go wrong. There's friendly fire. Civilians get killed, and things are going to happen. And so, I'm not sure. Earlier on in President Obama's term, there might have been a motivation. The party's going to help you, and there's things that could dangle in front of you. What can they dangle in front of you at this point?
Right. I mean, I think there's
this guy dragging you down and ending your career for what?
And I don't know that that frankly the dynamics on this are really terribly different than anything else that might expose congressional Democrats to congressional Democrats who are facing a tough reelection. If they're willing to do that for President Obama on any number of issues. And so in all the reporting now that I have seen is that the president will not go forward without congressional approval. It's a little bit less clear what that means in terms of if the Senate says okay and the House doesn't. But from what I've read, that unless the House votes yes, he will not go forward. I don't know how much stock we can put into that, but here's one argument that I want to talk to you about because I have been completely mystified about this, and it is summed up in the Politico, but I see this everywhere. It's written over and over and over again. The loss, okay, so failure for Obama and once again proved that his sway over Congress is extraordinarily limited. The loss would have serious reverberations throughout the next 3 months when Obama faces off against Congress in a series of high-stake fiscal battles. Now, there's a piece by Peter Baker in the Times that talks about the implications for things like a potential strike on Iran, and we'll get to that. But can you, for a moment, explain to me how the logic of this statement? I mean, I have seen, as much as I think there is a weak argument behind the idea of sending a message, and if we don't send a message, then certain things are going to happen. At least on some level, I can see it as a very rudimentary, I think unsophisticated and wrong argument. I don't even hear anybody saying anything other than it is just the case that if he loses this vote, somehow his presidency is over and he loses all sway. I don't get how that happens.
How he loses his vote, or how?
No, like how the loss would have serious reverberations throughout the next 3 months when Obama faces off against Congress in a series of high-stake fiscal battles. How does losing a vote to strike Syria in any way implicate the battles that we're going to see in terms of shutting down the government because of the debt ceiling, or not, passing any type of continuing resolution on the budget? How does it implicate that? I mean, the analogy, it seems to me, is, hey, you can't shoot free throws, so we're not going to pick you to play on our hockey team. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think it's they're looking at more of like how Washington runs sometimes on momentum, on the sort of who's up, who's down, and how that's all kind of exaggerated by people like Politico,
Yes.
so that the people on the right who maybe thought they weren't going to be able to shut down the government, they were threatening to do over Obamacare. Everybody was saying, even many Republicans, conservative Republicans, Richard Burr and Tom Coburn, people were saying, "Well, you're crazy." And by the way, being called crazy by Tom Coburn really says something about you. That they may now become more emboldened and ask for more and threaten more. But I know what you're saying. Look, in the end, I think it is another thing that pisses progressives off more at Obama. But in the end, we want what we want, and so people are going to fight for what they're going to fight for in any of these bills, for food stamps to not be destroyed and everything else, no matter what. And people on the right are pretty much going to try and destroy everything that President Obama does, pretty much, no matter what. those two dynamics won't really change very much. So does he lose? Do his numbers go down? And does that mean that so-called moderate, or let's call them corporatist Democrats abandon them? I don't know. I guess it's possible if they start fearing for their reelection that they need to be bigger hawks on the deficit. I guess that's one way it could happen. I don't know how else.
Yeah,
frankly,
I mean, but I hear
think about all the different moving pieces there.
I hear Democrats on on MSNBC sort of repeating this mantra, like this will leave President Obama really weak going into these budget discussions. Well, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. There doesn't seem to be even. I don't even hear anybody explaining the mechanics behind that. I mean, in what way does this leave him? Which is not to say that, frankly, I don't even know.
I think he's already pretty weak going into these discussions.
Indeed, and I don't even know, frankly, if I want him strong or weak, depending on what he's willing to do at any given point.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's the biggest problem of all, is that we can't even line up behind this guy and say we know that we're for what he's going to do, because we don't know what the hell he's going to do. Maybe CPI will, change CPI will be back on the table. Who knows? We never know. So that's why it's kind of hard to know, if he's stronger or weaker, if you want to be stronger or weaker. But again, the part of that analysis that maybe makes some sense. Yeah, I could see it turning some people from the more corporatist wing of the Democratic Party against him and not wanting to be associated with him in anything he does, and maybe they'll embrace more of the fix the debt stuff. That's possible. I could see that as an outgrowth of this, but right away you've got a recalcitrant group of people on the far right who are a bunch of children in the playground who want everything they want and want to do stupid things that don't work in the real world and will not cooperate in any single way because that's considered to be treason among their own. So that was going to be very difficult to manage to begin with, and the fact that President Obama and his people have never, ever, ever understood this simple concept that these people are not going to agree with him on anything and not going to work with him on anything makes it worse, because he often allows them to define the terms, because he thinks, well, I'll meet them halfway, as if they would ever meet him 1/10 of the way. So, as usual, I don't know that I see any of those dynamics changing.
Yeah, and then frankly, it's like, okay, if I'm reading this Peter Baker piece, which talks about, and this at least makes, I mean, from a mechanical standpoint, it makes sense to me, where he writes that there's a real sense. He writes this: in private, Mr. Obama and his team see the votes as a guidepost for the rest of his presidency, beyond the immediate question of launching missiles in Syrian military targets. If Congress does not support a relatively modest action in response to a chemical attack that killed more than 1,400 people in Syria, now, I'm just reading here, folks. I don't know, so I'm stipulating all this stuff for the sake of this point. Obama advisor said the president will not be able to count on support for virtually any use of force. I'm not terribly concerned if this makes an attack on Iran that much harder, frankly. And if someone has an argument to me that, like, hey, if President Obama can't convince the House to vote to attack Syria, then there's less of a chance he's going to be able to push through Larry Summers as chair of the Fed. Okay. It's like I don't even understand the arguments that are being made.
I don't think as you're saying, there's a specific you can't do A, you can't do B dynamic. I do think that losing the vote or the Syria vote does make him look weak, and it may hurt his poll numbers, may lead some people who could have been there and been willing to kind of go with him in swing districts to walk away on the Democratic side. I can see ways it hurts him. I don't know. I think you're right. I think it's a bit of an overwrought analysis. The bigger problem, I think, is you're now taking time on this when you should be, because the Obama people don't ever seem to understand public relations. They need to be out there talking about things and pushing your message, and instead they're pushing stuff on Syria right now, and so this thing's being pushed back a couple weeks, and I think it may make it harder in that way just for them to make their case. But it was always going to be really hard anyhow. I mean, we're in those times right now. We're dealing with a bunch of loons in Congress, and we will be. But I will say this: I definitely think the push on Syria, in a way, I mean, let's face it, if they authorize it and we go in some form and anything goes wrong, which, as I was saying, easily can, I mean, he's throwing a big wild card into the 2014 elections. And let me be very clear. Obviously, I'm only doing a political analysis right now.
Exactly. Yes,
From a policy side, I completely disagree with it, and we could go on for a while about limited strikes by nature, if they're just limited, aren't going to do anything unless you can get if you could get the guys chemical stockpiles or something like that, then there could potentially be an argument. We won't. We don't know where they are. I think we've already
publicly said that we wouldn't even go after them because, the problem with blowing up chemical munitions is that chemicals go everywhere.
Go in the air. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if any. You're right. Some sort of a force would then have to be sent in, and that's a whole other conversation. But what's the objective? With the question being, what the hell is the objective there? And is on the policy side. And the objective, it sounds a lot like it's just like you're slapping the guy's hand and saying you were bad. We're going to drop a couple bombs on you. Because I'm not sure what else the objective is. It's not going to degrade him in any real way. It's not going to. I mean, they're talking about. If you want to protect people, then perhaps a multinational. If we could get, maybe we could have done this if we weren't talking about airstrikes, but just a sort of a no-fly zone like what we had in Iraq before we like the dumbasses we went in there. Maybe something like that could have. There are things we could do if we would actually, join the International Criminal Court. Maybe we could push for a case there, but we don't join that because we've got a couple of guys in our own country here, like the waterboard people, who are scared they might end up there. So it's there are options. There's freezing Syrian assets. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do. But in the end, limited bombing, which can lead to more civilians dying, motivating more people to want to come and kill us, leading Hezbollah to be even more motivated to attack us. There's so many things that can go wrong, and yet I don't see in any way how a few attacks dissuades Assad's side, considering he knows that if the other side wins, they're going to what happened to Saddam Hussein. He will be executed, and it'll probably end up on a phone video somewhere with people mocking him as they walk him in to execute him.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about this that doesn't make any sense, or there's so much that's not being discussed now. Marcy Wheeler has a great piece that she posted yesterday, arguing that the administration's real agenda here, and it's reflected also in the Senate markup of the authorization for use of military force, is regime change. And there is a stated policy that the U.S. wants Assad to go. But, the problem with this is that it is unclear, like, nobody's talking about what happens afterwards. I mean, there's just no...
Where does that sound familiar from?
Well, I mean, I
can't think. It's like just the flowers that will be tossed at us in the street. I mean, I don't get, again, I mean, the guys that are going to make money off of this, the munitions guys and all the rest, I get why they're in favor of it. They're amoral, scary people, but I get why they want to do it. But these neocons that never learned their lesson, what do they think it is that we could have done to make Iraq have turned out any differently? I'd like to know. The blowback, every single thing we've done in the Middle East the last 50 years has had blowback that has negatively affected us. From when we installed the Shah in 1953, 1954. I mean, every time we meddle there, we call it, or really almost anywhere beyond the Middle East and any Muslim countries. I mean, we armed and helped, and it was a great cause and wonderful kicking the Russians out of Afghanistan. Well, that worked out well for us, arming bin Laden and his friends and training them. I mean, at what point is this just all absurd, not to mention arming Iraq the way we did in the 80s and using banks and others to launder money and send it to them and agricultural subsidies, quote unquote, and the rest to arm them against Iran, which led them to then poison gas. I mean, I'm just so tired of all this. We're sitting here, we're watching basically, most people probably haven't even heard of Myanmar or Burma, whichever you'd like to call it, where people are being slaughtered all the time.
Right.
Well, but we're not doing anything there. I was just reading an article about the their extremists marching through Muslim villages and chopping people up with machetes. Not a much more pleasant way to go, by the way, than poison gas. Where are we on getting involved there?
I think, I still contend that if you were to ask these neocons about Iraq, they would still count this as a victory. And I'm not convinced that from their perspective, it's wholly irrational. I think their perspective is also one of being sociopathic in many respects, but
they're
I
taking
do
out a
not.
two-bit tyrant to strengthen Iran, a country that they're more scared of. That was a good move. They
Well,
would argue.
I think that's just part of the program. That's just we haven't gone far enough yet. We just haven't finished the
we
meal.
Started the program. We haven't
Yeah.
actually just turned the whole place into a glass factory. Is that
Well,
essentially their
look,
view?
we now have a massive presence in Baghdad, in the Greens, in the Emerald City or whatever it is. We still have this beachhead there from their perspective. I think, the hundreds of thousands of people who were killed, the cost to this country, I still think from their perspective, yeah, it's worth it. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of being a sociopath is that the downsides seem a lot less.
You don't have trouble with those weird feelings like guilt and compassion.
And well, you just see the world in a very different way, and we have access. They may not be pumping oil there, but we've certainly made sure that the Chinese haven't made inroads into that oil. And I think from that perspective, they would still say, on balance, Iraq is a victory. And then, of course, we need 15, 20 years to see if this turns out to be a tourist destination for Americans, somewhere down the road. I mean, I think this is, why.
I got to be honest with you, I'm kind of excited for Kirk Disney.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think this is the only way that you guys like this coming on the television is still, talking as if they haven't been completely disgraced. And so, but I think it's just sort of, it's stunning. And look, this is not to diminish. And I think there is an argument, at least in some type of vacuum, that chemical warfare is especially abhorrent because it is just aimed at civilians. I also think it's something that is easy for the international community to say we don't want the use of chemical weapons because there's an acknowledgement that it's also a poor military weapon in terms of if you're actually trying to win a war as opposed to, put down a rebellion or kill civilians.
Well, look, I agree. Don't get me wrong. I think chemical weapons are terrible, but we've used them and do use them.
Indeed.
White phosphorus and napalm, and I mean, and so have our allies, and so have numerous other countries. So this just reminds me again of like the hypocrisy of where we closed off everywhere and locked everybody in a room on Iraq and made everybody forget that we'd supported them in the past, we'd armed them, and it was all, this guy used chemical weapons, as if anybody, not to say it's not a terrible thing, it is a terrible thing, but I was just saying about Burma, there's lots of terrible things going on in lots of other places in the world. We didn't get involved in Mali, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, we go on and on about there's a whole lot of places where people have been slaughtered that we've not gotten involved in. Okay, so here there's chemical weapons, but some of that at least is still left over from a time, World War I, when where we decided that these things were beyond the pale, and there are a lot of things since then that haven't been banned that are also beyond the pale that are out there being used. Regularly, and I agree with you about
our white
weapons
phosphorus. I have to say, though, is blessed by God.
Random bombings don't kill civilians. I mean.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yes, I mean the hypocrisy that I think is sort of, and people should understand as we're talking about this that, the hypocrisy is baked into the cake. I'm not forgiving it. I'm also just sort of it's hypocritical. And
did you see the piece in the New York Times again about not that I didn't know this already and that you didn't know this because we know who, kind of like in Libya and all these other places, we know who often the rebel forces are made up of. But did you see sort of the article in the Times about what these guys are? I mean, we're talking.
There was a video that accompanied that of rebel forces basically summarily executing some Syrian soldiers. And one of the arguments that we're hearing from the administration is that we've done a much better job in sort of sorting out who's who over there. And so when we give aid, in June, I think it was of this year, the president started authorizing basically providing lethal, I don't know what the exact phrasing is, but lethal weapons capacity to the rebels, and we supposedly have started to sort out who are the good rebels and who are the bad rebels. But inevitably, when you create a failed state and you create a power vacuum, those who are the worst actors tend to come out on top. I mean, sadly,
those that don't respect any norms, the Alawites, which is what the Assad family are a minority there. They're a break-off sect from the Shiites, and they're going to be if hardcore radical Al-Qaeda like Sunnis take over there, they will be massacred very clearly.
Yeah, it's going to, right, exactly. I mean, we're going to destabilize the whole area. And then the question becomes like, the only sort of extant question is this all a way in which to get Russia to begin to pressure for some type of, if not regime change, some type of cosmetic regime change in Syria that leads at least to some type of negotiated if not end to the internal conflict, a sort of dampening down of it in some way. It's tough to get a take on this, and it sort of doesn't. It's sort of a fool's errand to try and assess what the administration's sort of real sort of agenda is here, because they seem all over the place.
Well, I mean, again, and then so we jumped off of the politics to the policy, which is obviously important. But to go back to the politics of it, what if what we do somehow does in some way weaken Assad enough, which I don't think it will, so that some of these groups do take over, and then there's a mass slaughter of Shia and Alawites and other groups by Sunnis, and that's on their hands. And then, I mean, what we're doing here, quite frankly, in this country, is we're setting up a lunatic isolationist like Rand Paul or Ted Cruz to become the next president. Because somebody like that will run on a very populist isolationist bent that wouldn't have worked in the way they would like it to in the past, but now might work, whether it's Hillary Clinton who served in this administration or it's any other Democrat who they'll just tie to a failed action, or an action that, as Ted Cruz has already saying and said out loud, that President Obama, that we shouldn't be Al-Qaeda's Air Force in there fighting for them. I mean, we've seen this rhetoric on the other side for the people who didn't want to go into Iraq. You were helping Al-Qaeda. You think these guys won't do the opposite?
Yeah,
now?
I got to tell you.
And the difference is they'll actually be right this time, potentially.
I think the electoral implications of all of this are greatly overstated. I mean, on all sides. I mean, the reality is that the American people could barely get moved about a prolonged war in Iraq that was quite clear by 2004 and certainly by 2008 that we had been lied into. And they still, I don't think it was at the top of their list. I mean, maybe in the Democratic primary it was important, but I don't think, frankly, if there's more atrocity over there or less atrocity over there, I mean, I don't, look, I'm again. Let me just preface this by saying to people before they send me emails about that I'm being cold-hearted. I'm not making that analysis right now. I'm just talking in terms about the implications of politics that. This may have more implications in a Republican primary, but in terms of general elections and whatnot, I just don't think that the American public is, frankly, that moved, to their discredit, I should say, that moved one way or another by this.
I agree. I disagree with you somewhat. I honestly think that the 2004 election, which was the closest re-election that any two-term president ever had, where Bush really barely beat Kerry, and they brought out every stop possible to do it. They suppressed every vote they could and the rest. I think that at that point Bush was severely damaged by what was going on in Iraq and what was in the headlines every day. And I think the 2006 election, where the Democrats took back the House, a lot of Democrats were running on Iraq. Eventually, initially they were following the dumb DCCC advice not to, but they started seeing it and doing it. I don't. When they started seeing it was a powerful issue in some of the special elections. I mean, I don't know.
Listen,
Sam.
no,
I
would
mean, the
agree.
thing
I
is
would
that
agree.
Syria may never get that big.
I would agree. I would agree that in '06 that Democrats ran against Iraq, and that you're talking about an off-year election that motivated their base. But I just don't see. I mean, I think if we I don't see this as being as much of a motivating factor. At least in terms of, I mean, perhaps in 14 it may have something to do with some marginal House races, but I don't, it's possible, I guess, if it turned out, but I just don't see it as having that much of an implication. And it's true, Bush losses supposedly won that reelection in a closer margin than most second-term presidents, but he also didn't even win his first election, which also made him sort of a unique president to be sitting as an incumbent at that point.
It's true. I mean, he was a particularly weak president. I mean, I'm not saying definitively. I think it has more impact than you're giving it credit for. I'm not saying it necessarily will make a difference. I think it might, certainly in some districts, which could make a difference. Look, every House race counts, especially when you don't have the House. And there's some swing districts where we could make some inroads with the economy improving, even slower than we'd like, but improving, and the rest. But I think that this complicates it. That this gives them an issue to hit Democrats over the head with. And again, I agree with you that unless something goes really wrong, but if you sort of compound this, I think people are war weary after Afghanistan and Iraq and everything. If you compound all that with Syria and some stuff goes seriously wrong in Syria, I'm not saying it's definitive, but if it gives any opening to a lunatic like Cruz or Paul, that frightens me. Because I don't see how either of those guys become president any other way.
Yeah, I'm not as concerned with that, but I do think, and I also think, I mean, along those lines, we just got to wrap it up. We only had 2 or 3 minutes here, but I think that 130 or 115 number that we hear about Democrats willing to vote for in the House, I think as that vote approaches, if it's clear that it's not going to pass, you're going to see a lot less Democrats vote for it. Because why would you put yourself out there as voting for something unless you're fairly secure that is not going to? And so I think that number, that number could be much higher in my estimation. The Republicans who are planning to vote for it, I think, are doing so because that's probably their profile in their district. But I would imagine we're going to see even less numbers. But now, just so that people understand, what we're looking at is probably sometime next week, we're going to see a vote in the Senate. It could stretch into the week after, but unlikely. And then probably the following week, we may see a vote in the House. So we still got another couple of weeks to find out where that's going to go. And then we still don't even know what's going to happen after that because you can't, just because you're not authorizing a military strike doesn't mean you walk away from this situation.
Right. Very right. I mean, then what's the follow-up from that? I mean, that's exactly right.
I think, sadly, we're going to be waiting for some greater atrocity.
Where does it go from there? I don't know.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I think it could go in a lot of different directions. I think we've added a lot of sort of uncertainty into this. And again, don't get me wrong, that's a political analysis. And if this was something where I thought was a policy that could help people and was a sound policy, then it's worth whatever whatever the political suffering is.
Yes, but you would have a lot less political suffering if there was a sound policy behind it, because then people would be making an argument for it. But the arguments we're hearing now are like, this is a Munich moment? Are you serious?
Assad John now, Kerry should just be embarrassed, frankly.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
We've really seen the bookends of that guy's career now. Oh. I mean, his career started by asking who the last person would be to die in an unjust war, and his career is now ending on, Munich comparisons, when the whole reason, one of the main reasons that, as it was dubbed, that we went into Vietnam was the so-called Munich syndrome, of not wanting to have another Munich, moment. And here we are. I mean, I wonder if he ever looks at his own career with any irony. Frankly, because give me a break.
Has there anybody, short of probably Bill Christoff, who really believes that Assad, if we don't stop him now, is going to go on some type of international rampage with chemical warfare? I mean, the logic that he will see, if we don't strike him now, he's just going to do it the next time. I think that, that even and look, and we just I get a minute here because we got another guest come, but the idea, like it's fairly clear to me that this chemical attack did not come from the rebels. But it's not clear to me that Assad is in control of his military and his government enough that this couldn't have happened from other forces within Syria. And that could be a rogue general. It could be not a rogue general. It could be a group of general. I mean, there's all sorts of different things. If you think that Assad would, there's a lesson to be learned by Assad if we strike him now, then you got to really think that he's a total idiot to have made this miscalculation for the sake of killing 1,500 people in a conflict that has already taken 100,000 lives. I don't know. There's a whole lot of this that doesn't add up.
That's the thing. There's a whole lot of rhetoric that doesn't add up, and there's a whole lot of policy outcomes that don't add up from doing this. And I don't get it. And I will say quickly, if there are non-violent policies, that can work from the ICC to not work but weaken them. If there was something I believe could work, as I said, if there was a no-fly zone instituted by a number of countries, we can get the Arab League involved in NATO. If there was, and I would say right now that if we had clear intelligence of the very clear kind, not the BS kind, that you've got one group of people marching on another group of people about to commit a genocide, then yes, I would support some sort of a limited action to destroy those particular people. But to get involved when anti-aircraft missiles are hidden in cities and where you don't know which side is which and who is what, and we don't even know who we're helping, although I suspect we do know who we're helping, bad people that are really no better than Assad, then I just, I feel terrible about civilian deaths. I would do anything to prevent them. That doesn't mean that there is an answer just because you'd like there to be one.
Indeed. Great place to finish. Cliff Schecter, as always, a pleasure. Though sort of just a tragic topic to talk about on some level, and hopefully we don't increase the tragedy. We'll talk to you next week.
The rest of this day is casual Friday.
All right, indeed. Cliff Schecter, everybody. Thanks again, Cliff.